What's going on, guys? It's your boy Beats by Ash, back at it again with another episode of the Table One podcast, and today I'm joined by
Tulsa Clout Noah here, and we're going to be delving in perhaps, to the Lost Caverns of Ixalan draft set.
And as well, we're going to be talking about Wilds of Eldraine, which personally has been a fan favorite for us, kind of comparing the two. You might as well call this the Lost Caverns x Wilds of Eldraine Kumbaya sesh. We're going to be going over what we liked about each set. Tulsa Cloud Noah is kind of here to be the one talking more about Wilds of Eldraine. We're going to kind of go back and forth talking about the pros and cons that each of these sets provide, being the last two sets of draft before we end up getting the play boosters, aka the Skamaz boosters 2.0, because for some reason we needed 3 booster packs, and then now we need 2 booster packs. At the beginning of Wilds of Eldraine, we actually both kind of experienced it at the exact same time. We went to a pre-release in another state, and this was the only unenjoyable experience that I had. I remember my eyes were open, and I was like, I can play rats. That's when I became the rat enjoyer, and I was just so excited and happy about this until we just went against another team who had this niche specific card that only worked in two-headed giant.
Blind Obedience. The guy played Blind Obedience turn 2. We lost the game on that.
I don't know if that guy's watching this video, but fuck you for using Blind Obedience. You were a cool guy in all their aspects, but if you see this, fuck you for using that against me.
Did us too dirty.
But I mean, other than that, the entire experience has been really enjoyable. Both of these sets kind of cater towards different crowds of people, even if it wasn't intended to be that way. So we're going to kind of delve into that. What do you think really hooked you on Wilds of Eldraine? I feel like you and me have honestly taken like a lot of breaks, and especially like on Arena for sure. There have been some sets I enjoyed, but I feel like Wilds of Eldraine is the one that most enticed me to be playing for most of the duration of the format.
My favorite part about draft is drafting itself. Playing comes secondary for me. The amazing thing about Eldraine is every single pick matters besides the last 3. You constantly have to be just making choices about your deck, especially an example is like Hopeless Nightmare. How many Hopeless Nightmares do you want in a black deck? How many bargain synergies? You have to keep track of so many things to try to have this refined deck. I just love drafting. After making a deck, low-key sometimes don't even want to play it, even if it's busted, because I just want to build another deck. That's the most enjoyable aspect for me, and that's what kept me just going over and over.
I think the 3 things for me that kind of hooked it, specifically in the draft portion, has got to be, number 1, the fixing. I mean, if I go back to the sets that I've most enjoyed throughout the history that I played the game, it would have to be Streets of New Capenna, which introduced the Tri-Lands, and as well Dominaria United, which also incentivized you to play 3-color decks because they had off-color kicker effects, which is kind of similar to what Wilds of Eldraine is doing with the off-color adventures, namely the fact that you can fix your mana in most color pairs. Now, obviously, there are some obvious exceptions to that rule, but for the most part, in most Magic sets that are 2-color pairs, if there is fixing and it's actually good, it's probably in green. Whereas in this set, I mean, you had Evolving Wilds, you also had the
Crystal Grotto.
The Crystal Grotto, you had the Prophetic Prism, which is just you can just throw that in any deck, and then if you have a card that's only a mana pip of an off color, then you can just throw that in, And that was something that I really enjoyed because, like you're saying, I mean, I like that the picks are still very important towards the latter end of the pack, and on top of that, I don't like being constrained into the 10 predetermined color pairs and what they're trying to do. And I know some people had some things to say against that, but I mean, I felt like you could kind of just do whatever you wanted within reason. It may not be the best, but if you wanted to try it, it was possible, where that's not always the case. If you want to have fun and make this bad card actually usable, you could do that. And not in every Magic set can you feasibly do that, because the fixing is not that good, and it just may not be available in the color pair that you're already in.
Yeah, and I will say on that color fixing, Crystal Grotto is probably one of the most amazing additions to drafting. I wish every set had Crystal Grotto in it in some way or form. That scry adding the consistency just ties everything together with that, like you were saying previously.
For sure. And on top of that, green is just actually playable for the first time in a long time, I'm just a sucker for green because I'm kind of bad at the game. I feel like in this set, green just had like a lot of mixed reactions. I will say a couple good things about green. Because of the fixing, it felt like you could kind of weave together a lot of combinations that were not normally possible with green. If we go through like the history of drafting, typically green is just always on the bottom. But in addition to that, there could be a good green archetype, but green, for at least in the sets I've played in, has never been good with every single color pair. Whereas in this format, I feel like that was showcased the most. Just because of like fixing, and also like cards like Brave the Wilds and green itself just also allowed you to kind of stitch the net together of what is possible. And so that was like kind of a big thing for me.
Yeah, and one of the things that I love doing in draft, as cube is like, my preferred way to draft, is you really could make like those 3 and sometimes even 4 color decks enabled by green.
When you think about when you're going to have the most agency towards the latter end of the pack, it's going to be in those 4 to 5 color decks, because then at that point, it doesn't matter if this card is out of range. Nothing is out of range. I can just choose the card I feel is the most powerful card in this pack. And personally, that's just the way that I like to draft. And I think some people didn't like that. And that's where, like, I think really differs who this set is for. I think a lot of people didn't like that you could just choose the most powerful card. And like, for example, if you had Imidane's Recruiter, I mean, one of the most impressive cards in the set, then you could pretty much throw that into a deck that isn't using red or white as a main color. Sometimes you're just green, black, and you're just double splashing both sides of the Imidane's Recruiter, and you're just picking the best card every time. And for me, I like to think about like analyzing the cards. Like, that brings me a lot of enjoyment, like knowing what card is better in this given situation. And that's one of the ways I think, like, as a person who's like kind of sweaty or like a tournament spike, that you can get an edge over the other people, is just being better at analyzing certain cards. And I guess some people didn't like that because they're like, oh yeah, well, like, it's not that much about synergies. It's just like every card can go with every card. And it's like, yeah, that's exactly what I want to happen.
And I would also say, but there is synergy. There is so much synergy in the deck. Like, the roles, the downside of the roles, it is a very complex mechanic. For introducing a player in, and even if you've been drafting for a while, it still took me probably like 6 drafts or something to really like understand how to evaluate role cards correctly with the roles. And just like, you got bargain, you have like green white enchantments, there's so many different things that are enabled, and of course bargain is probably one of my favorite mechanics that they've introduced, with just how synergistic it was with the set as a whole, and I was a big fan.
Yeah, bargain was one of the things that, I think it was just well commonly agreed upon as just a great mechanic, because it wasn't like anything crazy, but what it did is it just added optionality, which is important to increase the intricacy of the gameplay, especially when like a lot of the cards don't do like crazy like synergistic things, or those things don't work. Because some people didn't like about the set is that like the blue-white tap archetype didn't work.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, but there's also other things that add optionality to what you're doing, and bargain was one of the main ones. And to the people who said, I didn't like that things that were intended to be working didn't work out, how fun really would it be if the blue-white tap deck was actually good? It's like, to me, there's nothing enjoyable if we just increased like some of the stun cards from like 2 turns to 5 turns. If I just stun down your guy for 5 turns, that basically just means I killed your guy, but I'm just gonna make you look at it and let you know you can't do anything with it. To me, that's not very enjoyable or creates optionality. It's just really degenerate. And I just don't know why you would want that to work in the first place.
Yeah, and it's just the worst, because you feel, especially like in those losing games, when you just have a stun counter, though, you're kind of forced to continue playing. Like, you can't, like, in good nature concede, because they could just brick for a couple turns. Whereas, like, if I get, grappled, the end, shatter the oath, like, it's like, all right, we can pack it up to the next one. But just because white-blue didn't work doesn't mean, like, the other combinations, like, were still fully functional, I would say. The next weakest one would probably be the green-white enchantments. But even then, like, if you could pull like a Sir Armont, and then if discounting any of the rares, you still could have, like, I've played against some of the enchantment decks, and I originally like kind of put it off at first, but then I played against a guy who was just using Slumbering Keep card and whatnot, a card that I think still kind of don't value as hard, but with the right synergy it worked, and the deck, plenty of rolls to keep that the gas going with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, you could do the green-white thing. The issue was that it was just locked behind certain, like, rares. Where it's like, yeah, okay, you could have Sir Armont, that's pretty good. But, like, some of the key role players are, like, the green card.
The green-white Yenna, the 4.
Yeah, the green-white Yenna, and then there was just a green rare that just straight up said, anytime you play an artifact, I think you get 2/1/1 counters, and then whenever you play an enchantment, you get to draw a card. So the glue of that strategy was playable. It was just locked behind certain rares. And the thing is, you're probably going to see those more often than you would, like, other bombs, because it's a situational role player and only becomes like an above rate card in that deck unless someone's just rare drafting. But other than that, I would say, like, the thing that didn't work even worse than that, tied with, like, the white-blue deck, was the green-blue deck, just because you just had no removal. And, like, blue was already bad. Blue and green were bad for the same reasons. Basically, most of the commons were just not on the same level as the other colors. So typically when you're going to use a color that has very, like, below-rate commons, you're trying to get in on that strategy because of the uncommons you saw, but now you're asking yourself to do that for both halves of your deck. So in order for this deck to come to fruition, your deck just needs to have, like, an unreasonably low amount of commons, which is just not going to happen. And even if you do, you just can't interact with anyone for the first couple turns, because that's what Blue's issue was, that you just had minimal interaction on the first couple turns.
And then, of course, that's, a death sentence when you have, like, Torch the Tower, just all these premium cheap removal spells. And yeah, they're just, they're both supporting colors. The green-blue cards, they only really worked when I was, like, had another color. Like, I was a 3-color deck and had a lot of fixing. But yeah, that was just, they had the same pitfalls. So it was unfortunate. I only had, like, one actual green-blue deck just from a high roll.
Yeah, I mean, the only time the green-blue ever worked for me was actually whenever I disconnected, and then the auto-picker, I just come back, and somehow I just have 3 up the beanstalk, and I think I had, like, 4 Hamlet Gluttons or something. Like, I had, like, an unreasonable deck that, like, shouldn't have happened, and it didn't actually happen when I was at the computer. So that just shows you, like, how rare of a deck that was. And then I think I didn't even get 3 wins. I think I went 2-1. So that still just shows you, like, the format was just heavily about, like, who has more removal to some extent, because it was a faster format, but you could mitigate that by using early game interaction. And it's like blue and green both have more powerful cards in the late game, but then if I don't have any early game interaction, how do I get out of the early game and not lose to people who were playing rats?
Like, the strongest card you had was Graceful Takedown in green, and that requires you to have an already established board, which is something that green-blue is not going to be doing early on. And then the next one is the 3-mana fight card that gives a monster roll. So that's where it was lacking.
I think one of the things that I enjoyed most about Wilds of Eldraine, on top of the fixing, was just the fact that the bombs, even taking the removal out of the equation, they were just very answerable. Obviously, like, if the guy has that 2-mana 2/2 white card that just gives him a sorcerer roll every turn, the Spellbook Vendor, I mean, if you just don't answer that, that's, like, really broken. But there was just so many answers to that, and if we take those answers out of the equation, that guy also has to do other things to make that work. It's like, yes, that is a very oppressive card, but when is it the most oppressive? When the guy already has, like, 3 other creatures on the board, and you can't interact for 4 turns. And if he has 3 other creatures on the board, and you can't interact for 4 turns, did he really need the sorcerer rolls, or was he just going to steal the game?
And it does, obviously it is going to win more games than an average common, but that's the key difference between Ixalan and Eldraine, is just with the low quality removal, it's just like, it's why flyers are good, right? Like those early flyers clocking you, there's no Torch the Tower, there's no, cheap removal spell to get those things off the board.
Yeah, and I would say that, like, flyers in Wilds of Eldraine had a completely different effect on the format than Lost Caverns of Ixalan, because I can't even really think off the top of my head many flyers other than Baronati that were just like, I kind of want this every single draft. I mean, even Baronati is just like way better in the blue-black deck, where you just have like an all-fairies deck. I mean, other than that one archetype, flyers really didn't allow you to end the game very fast. You know, think about that. Where it's like, in Lost Caverns Ixalan, there are some decent removal cards. I mean, there are some really good removal cards in black specifically, but the issue is that this guy can just go turn 1, play a 1/1 flyer that also has vigilance, and then also whenever Miner's Guidewing dies, he gets to explore on another guy. Yeah. So if you go turn 1 flyer, then turn 2 a second flyer, well, now I need to answer the guy's first flyer because he's just going to keep clocking me and he has vigilance. But if I do that, he just gets to transfer the value over to another flyer. And so it's just kind of compounding value, and there's not enough like premium low-costed interaction to like answer multiple of those. Like maybe you answer the guy's first flyer, but if he has a high roll deck with 8 1-drop flyers, like you just can't win the game. And if you're in best of 1, you just lost because you went second. Yeah. And that's one thing that like I don't really like. And then when you think about like flyers are already hard to interact with, you add in bombs that it's like, okay, since the format is so fast and the guy went 1-drop flyer, 2-drop flyer, I needed to use my 1 copy of premium interaction on that card, and then he plays a bomb. And bombs in this set are already hard to interact with, but I just used my 1 removal on the flyer because I was going to lose if I didn't do that. And now he just has this bomb, and I just lose the game.
Yeah, and then Eldraine, of course, had a bunch of incidental reach creatures, like Grabby Giant, Reach, Beanstalk Worm, Reach. So those cards, at the lower rarities, was keeping some of those fairy cards in check.
I mean, yeah, but also the fairies deck was just a straight-up slow deck. Yeah. You think about like what was good about the fairy deck. We just had like a lot of like situational role players in blue that are just otherwise straight up ass. And the best fairy decks that you would have are because you just have a strong black card pool. Because you need that premium interaction, and it was just really nice that that interaction was available at common. But none of the like flyers, for the most part in that archetype, were necessarily aggressive. Like the aggressive flyers, they were at higher rarities, if any at all, and not nearly on the same level as the speed of the flyers in Ixalan.
Yeah, like what the most aggressive flyers, the 1 blue, the snare sprite that lets you tap something and put a stun counter on it. Like that's like the most aggressive one, or maybe like the black 1/1 flyer that surveils. Like that's what, and that was mainly just played for value, anyways.
Yeah, or maybe like the rare guy who, whenever he attacks, you just give 1/1 counters.
Talion's Messenger.
Yeah, so if you had a card that said Talion, that was like the only thing that you could do to like be the aggressor. And for the most part, the only way that was a playable deck is because you got lifelink with Baronati. So it's just kind of trying to do a completely different thing than all of the flyers in this other set.
Although I will say there is one extremely aggressive flyer, is the blue-black legend. That's 2 mana, and whenever a fairy enters the battlefield, they lose 1. And has flash for some reason too. But
that's a Talion's card.
Oh, okay, fair.
Yeah, no, there's like 4 Talion's card, and they're all just the best, the cards that you want to put in your deck.
Yeah.
It's an unwritten rule that if it says Talion, you should pick it.
That's real.
What were some of the most like irritating cards to deal with in Wilds of Eldraine? I'm going to start it off with Gruff Triplets, my number one most hated card.
Yeah, Gruff Triplets, that was just a full beat. That's probably one of the most like warping ones too. It being 3 green, even some of the the 2-color decks, like that 3 green pip cost. Sometimes you couldn't cast it on turn 6, even if you're playing a green deck. And then with that, of course, the putting the counters on, you need to use so much premium removal. Like what you have to use 2 removal spells on a Gruff triplet after you trade with it, which is just not ideal at all.
And both of those forms of interaction need to be at instant speed, because you need to do it
in response.
Yeah, in response. So it's like, that's just asking a lot from you, and you're not going to get these cards all at one time. So it's like, if you had 3 removal cards in your hand, who's to say you're just going to save all of them for this guy to put out this one specific rare, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of times you weren't going to have those answers because you needed to respond before the guy could do that, And that card was just overall irritating. The big picture here is there weren't that many irritating cards to play against.
The big dragon, like...
Which dragon?
The mythic one, the red mythic. Not Decadent.
Realm Scorcher Hellkite.
Yeah, that's my least favorite card to play against. But
really? That card was very irritating to play against. At the same time, I feel like I just didn't go against it a lot. And then I only got to draft it one time, and I logged like almost 100 drafts. And so it was like really irritating, but it was kind of like hidden. Like I just wasn't allowed to see it until I was about to go 3-0. And then the one guy would just slide in. He's like, okay, ping all of your 1-drops. And then other than that, it was like Imidane's Recruiter.
Yeah, Imidane's Recruiter was a miss. Like, that was a miss. Like, that definitely made the draft experience way worse. Just randomly, like, and then the worst part is they pay the 5 mana to get the 2/2/2s, and then it's like, okay, I'm just screwed. Like, you just
yeah, and then you just have Vigilance for no reason. There were so many things they could have done with that card that would have, like, fixed things, and I would have, like, even less caveats with the set. But we can kind of talk about that card is one of the only issues with adding that level of fixing in a set, because that's kind of like the first time in a long time that we've seen that level of fixing and that much of an incentive to splash other colors. And one of the reasons why that is a downside is because if you did just see Imidane's Recruiter, you could just put it in your deck 9 out of 10 times. Like I already said, that if you're just not playing red or white, you can put it in your deck. And, I put it in my deck quite a few times when I was playing green, and I just didn't play either color. And it just won me the game on the spot just because it provides too much value. And it's also, like, meeting pretty much every single part of the quadrant. Like, it's just an overstated card. It's really easy to play. And the fact it was at uncommon was just really irritating. I think that if it was a rare, I probably wouldn't have as many like problems with it, because then it wouldn't be in as nearly as many decks as it was, because it's showing up as the first pick. And it's like sometimes some people would just let that card go like 8 picks deep because they just didn't pick the fixing cards. And then now, like, Johnny just has 4 Imidane's Recruiters in his green-black deck, and you're just like, what the fuck, dude? You're not even playing green-black. Like, this is, like, not what, like, this set was intended to be, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Imidane's Recruiter definitely was breaking, I think, the rules that, like, I wouldn't say, like, they didn't, like, purposely, do the rules of the set, right? But just how it played out, the play patterns, Imidane's Recruiter was really harmful to that. And then, of course, what's worse than the first one? The second one. Like, if they have 2, it's just, like, you get drowned in value. It's so irritating.
Or you could just reuse it. Like, for example, in the Store Championship draft, I had the green rare that's 3 mana, 3/4, and it says that you can return an adventure card from exile.
Sentinel of Lost Lore.
Yeah, so I had that, and it was like, okay, you just lose. And the Imidane's Recruiter really didn't have anything to do with my deck. It's just because I saw it and I just reused it 2 times. There was nothing the other guy could do because it's providing value on the front end on both sides of the card. Where a lot of other adventures, it's a very common theme, where one side of the adventure provides you value on the front end, and the other side provides you value on the back end. And that was kind of one of the first instances that we've really seen of an effect like that.
Yeah, I personally didn't draft the first Eldraine, so I can't speak on the how the adventure cards played out. But in this set, is like, yeah, especially like the commons. So many of the commons were good. Conceited Witch, extremely playable card. The 4-mana cycle. You had like the blue one that put a cursed roll, the white one that put the ward token, and then the green one that put the monster roll. Like all those cards were just like playable as fuck, like good filler.
Yeah. Now, kind of diving into some of the things that I didn't really enjoy about Eldraine, we've already kind of touched on a couple. Since I really like green, one thing I didn't like about green and as well blue is like those are the colors that honestly I enjoyed the most. But the issue was I didn't feel like they supported as many people at the table as the other colors did, and a lot of times it felt like building the deck was a super fun experience, but then I just got extremely punished, even if I was picking the best card in the pack every time, just because I didn't get specific cards. Like, talking about green, after like a large span of like 40 green drafts or something like that, I found out that I feel like if you're playing green, you probably want at least 2 Hamlet Glutton. And when you're playing green and you don't have Hamlet Glutton versus someone else not playing green, it's like, okay, this isn't as bad. It still sucks. But then when the other guy also has green in his deck and he has the card and you don't, it's like, I just can't win the game. Like, that was one of the only commons in green that it's like, I need this in my deck, no matter what. You could go without Brave the Wilds, even though it would be preferred, but one of the issues with green is it's like going to be slower than other decks. So you need a way to like get back in the game. And gaining the life, and then also like just putting a big body on the board as early as turn 5 was just what you needed. And if someone else just picks those and then just pivots off the deck, but you started off with like Tough Cookie and Welcome to Sweet Tooth, and then you just end up with none of those, you're still kind of screwed. Like, now your deck is reliant on your opponent just having no early game interaction, because the only way that you can win the game is when you draw an uncommon, and sometimes it just steals the game. But that's pretty much it, outside of opening the Hamlet Glutton. So that was something I found really irritating.
Yeah, that was a very annoying aspect of green. I loved forcing green too, so just like having like every single possible uncommon and common and not glutton and just like losing never feels good. But I also do want to say about the bonus sheet. Well, there are a lot of misses on there, but one card in particular I think was not very healthy was Hatching Plans. Hatching Plans, don't know, one colorless, one blue. When it's sent to the graveyard enchantment, you draw 3. That just stole just so many games, especially if you had multiple Hatching Plans, like you just instantly win the game. But the thing is, well, you don't that's the problem. You don't actually instantly win the game. You win the game over, a long period of time. So that was one of my gripes with the bonus sheet, besides having useless filler cards.
I mean, that's a good point. I was just about to talk about the bonus sheet as one of the biggest cons with the set. I guess I haven't played in as many sets as other people where the bonus sheet was included, but I definitely didn't enjoy the bonus sheet. And after I heard feedback from like other podcasts, people just talking about like what was on the bonus sheet, it really like hit me more over time, over a large span of drafts, because one of the things that they're doing with the new play boosters is they said they're trying to fix the issue with there being too much filler at common, and that's always going to be a thing in a set, right? But with the bonus sheet, since none of the cards were really good, except for the 3 or 4 that just auto-won you the game, that's just another filler slot 9 out of 10 times. So it's just adding more filler to the pack, and it's like, honestly, if you weren't able to make these 3-color decks more times than not in this set, then it would just be completely unplayable because of the filler added from the bonus sheet taking up another slot. I would argue that it would actually just be worse than the amount of filler in Lost Caverns, which in my opinion already has too much filler. And so at that point, it's like, why is the bonus sheet here? The good cards from the bonus sheet are already only available if you're buying a collector booster. And this is the draft booster. So it's like, if you're a commander player, you're going to buy the collector booster because you can't even get like the Smothering Tithe or like the other like high dollar card that you actually want for your commander deck unless you buy the high value booster. So basically, these cards are just in the draft booster and just lowering the experience from a pack that's supposed to be specifically for draft.
And then also I want to say though, with the filler, like Caverns and the common level filler, I feel like it's just worse than Eldraine. Eldraine, there was a couple filler cards, but every single common was played, like almost every single common you could put in your deck and feel not bad about it. Like, rounding out those last couple, like 22, 23 slots. And then you had cards like Candy Trail, where if you didn't have enough playables, boom, you have a colorless cantrip now.
Well, that's where I'm talking about how the fixing just solved a lot of the issues, because a lot of those cards, assuming, like, let's be real, they're role players. So it's like, okay, if you have in this archetype, then yeah, this is a really good card. Or it's like, I'm willing to play this card. It's very serviceable. I'm trying to think of some examples. My head is filled with Lost Caverns of Ixalan. I can think of a couple cards off the top of my head that you just don't want to play in any deck, which is like the 1-mana 1/1 guy who looks like he's from Lost Caverns, but for some reason he's not. You know what I'm talking about? The green guy who you pay 4 mana and then he has Ward 2 and you get a 1/1 counter.
Oh man, yeah, the little mushroom guy.
Yeah, it's like, that guy should have been in Lost Caverns. Like, he looks like he's in Lost Caverns. It's basically an Easter egg because the card's unplayable. But that was one of the only cards where it's like, this card is just ass. It's not a role player, and it's just ass. But there are a lot of other cards. I mean, even for example, I would say a lot of the cards that were filler, like the 2 and a green sorcery that allowed you to kill somebody with flying or an artifact. That card I actually played a lot because I strictly only play best 2 out of 3, and a lot of people would consider that a filler card, especially if you don't ever play green. It's just completely unusable. But for me, I always prioritize those over other cards that are just useless because that helped me so much. Like, one of the issues with green would be like the person putting out these. Wait, no, I think you could kill an enchantment too, right?
You could, yeah. It was spider food.
Yeah, spider food. So you could kill an enchantment. Could you kill an artifact?
Yes, yeah, you could kill artifact enchantment, which also helped. Spider food was really beneficial for the set, for the virtues, right? All the mainly the white and black one. Let's be real, but just having a clean answer to that was just amazing.
Oh yeah. Not to get off too topic here, but yeah, that kind of completely slid over my head. The most oppressive cards in this set were the enchantments. And so the fact that there was a card, there were multiple cards like that, where it's like, this card, I don't want to put it in my deck, but if you're in best 2 out of 3, it's just a way better card. That really helped the set, because that's also one of the issues with Lost Caverns, is that because the format's so fast, and there's not a lot of answers to the bombs in general, there's also not a lot of cards that have side deck implications. So it's like, that doesn't get any better. It doesn't solve that solution in best 2 out of 3. Whereas in Wilds of Eldraine, I've heard a lot of people talk crap on the Troublemaker Oath. That was a card that I easily played 1 copy in just about every green deck, because if you had a good green deck, obviously the areas you would have trouble with are going to be the aggressive enchantments. You know, like if the guy starts off with a Welcome to Sweet Tooth and you don't have an answer, you could just die. And there's also a couple cards at rare like that. I mean, if the guy played the White Virtue, for sure. And it's like, if you had this Troublemaker Oath, it just increases in so much value when you're in best 2 out of 3. Because when you're trying to get to the late game and you have this card that is like, okay, it can stop me from being steamrolled, or I can just contest their aggro card. It kind of just solved one of the issues with the slower controlling deck, which is also what made green more playable. I think those situational role players really allowed green to be more playable than it normally is because of that reason.
What was amazing about Troublemaker Oof is that flexibility. I kind of see it akin to like Cards of Cycling, where you use the part you need, right? And having that flexibility of being a body on the board to fight, like maybe like a ball, like, you know, prevent like a ballroom guest from attacking for free or whatnot. And then of course having the ability to hit artifact enchantments, even hitting like roll tokens. Like I've had games where like I've sacrificed a food I made with like that 3-mana wolf adventure, and then popped a roll, and that gave me just like that little bit of squeezing room to like finish the game and win pretty much. So it's kind of like it's a very like honed tool. Is what it feels like.
It's like something that's like, okay, this is decent, and at the end of the day, it's still a filler card, but it gave you an out to the really oppressive cards. Because that's one thing that I didn't like about the bombs in this set. I mean, maybe I'm just weird, and maybe I would just prefer a set with, like, no mythics. I don't know. Because I just don't like cards that when you play this card at the beginning of the game and you don't answer it within one turn, the other guy just wins the game. And it's like, cards like that give you a chance to answer those within one turn, because a lot of the other cards that are non-filler, the cards that might provide a similar, like, response to those cards, are typically going to be ones that you can't play until later in the game, right? And the optionality really just increased the fun level and also the strategy, because now I'm hedging my bets against this specific strategy where this guy's going to play these cards I think are going to perform very well versus my deck. And if you're not thinking like that, you know, it could obviously go the wrong way. Like, let's say you go against a bunch of people with low value decks. Well, then that card's terrible, because then you have nothing to answer. You know, especially with the bonus sheet, if you're in an in-person draft, a lot of the times, I'll give you an example. If I was at the Pro Tour, obviously, like, I'm not in the Pro Tour, but if I was there and the guy passing to me pack 1, this is my pick 2, and he passed me a pack and the bonus sheet card is missing, well, I'm going to assume that that guy took Bitter Blossom, or he took Hatching Plans, or something like cracks like that. And in that situation, I'm probably going to play Troublemaker Oath in my deck, even if I don't know that guy's deck list, because there's a lot of signals like that where if the guy took this, like, certain slot, I'm pretty sure he's playing an artifact or enchantment. And so it's not really as much RNG that you would think in person. Obviously on Arena, it's not as good, still good in best 2 out of 3. That is one of the things that I liked about the sideboard cards in this set, because honestly, very few times I wanted to sideboard in Lost Caverns of Ixalan so far. I might be like 20 to 30 drafts in. So not nearly the same, but I do really enjoy the sideboarding aspect. And that's something that Wilds of Eldraine did provide.
And then look at how much, you know, like, we're able to, you know, discuss, like, the oof just in so much detail, and I feel like that's true with, like, a lot of cards. Like, a lot of these cards are just so nuanced in the context of, you know, a draft game, and that just really heightened the overall drafting experience, having to make those micro decisions.
Yeah, because there was actually cards where it's like, this isn't the best card, but there's also just the opportunity to have a debate about that card. In Lost Caverns, there are certain cards where I just don't think there's any debate about this. This is just an ass card. And obviously, that's going to be like that with rares in any set, because they're going to include these constructed exclusive cards. You look at Lost Caverns, something like Blow Dart Gun, which is a 1-mana artifact that you pay 1 or 2 to equip it, and then if it's your turn, your guy gets Death Touch, or if it's their turn, your guy gets Reach. That card is just ass. I originally thought that maybe I wanted to sideboard it in against flyers, but then the other issue is, if I'm paying all this mana to load up this guy just to interact with their flyer they put on the board on turn 1, they've either probably gotten through with a bunch of damage, or it's just out of control and they have multiple flyers. And it's like, it's not doing enough for what I'm paying for, right? Like, it has to do a lot with the speed of the format. I kind of like one thing about Wilds of Eldraine. The more oppressive cards were enchantments, and you have these niche cards that can answer those that are at low cost, like Troublemaker Oath. You could play a control deck, even though the format is really fast, because the decks I had the most success with have to be Rats, number 1. Also, green-black mid-range, but mostly, like, the aggressive decks were the best. Red-white and red-black were just the best decks. Like, they had the highest win percentage on 17 lands, and that's what people were winning with. But the fact that you could also have these other contenders that could play a slow game in the same meta, that's one of the elements I'm looking for in a draft. And you could say the similar statement about Lost Caverns, but I don't think nearly to the same extent, because of the difference in the win rate that those decks have currently right now. Like, currently black encompasses the lowest win rate, I think like 3 or 4 of the lowest win rate color pairs. I think black-blue is like the best black deck. It's still like a bottom tier win rate deck compared to these aggro strategies. That kind of sucks, because one of the focal points of building decks like that in Lost Caverns is that you need to have rares to be incentivized to go down this pathway. That's something that I don't like about the certain draft sets, and maybe that's why I don't like bomb-heavy sets, not just because it's irritating that they're oppressive, but I think the designers focus a lot about making these certain pathways only accessible off of these bomb-level cards. And it also just makes people think differently about drafting those archetypes.
Circling on Ixalan, I want to talk about, we were talking about roles and like bargain, really good keywords. I am a huge fan of both cycling. I think cycling is just one of the most important and impactful keywords in draft sets. Calling back to Amonkhet, I really enjoyed a lot of Amonkhet drafts, specifically because of the cyclers. Like adding, consistency to a deck, it's always going to be good.
Sure.
And then also like the explore mechanic, I'm a huge, it's a... more consistency, not as strong, I will say, comparatively to cycling, but still like adding in there. The problem is the cards that do this and the cards that or generating the map tokens, which is a good love the map tokens. I think the map tokens are probably like one of the best new, like I would compare it to like when Clue first came out or when Food, but the cards that generate it, they just are not there. The power level's so weak, right?
No, those are the most broken cards.
Are those the most broken? Okay.
Yeah, map tokens is actually one of the most unfair things.
Okay.
Like, we look at like what some of the best cards are. In blue, Waterwind Scout is the top common. It's a 3-mana 2/2 flyer. You create a map token when it enters the battle. It's very understandable why you would think that's not good until you play a lot with the set. The reason it's good is because there are so many synergies with having an artifact. Now, when we're talking about the mechanics, like personally, my favorite mechanic is crafting. And I think crafting is very similar to Bargain in Wilds of Eldraine, where Bargain was always upside. And similarly in this set, crafting is also always upside. Do you know what crafting is?
Yep, yeah, exile the artifact and you transform.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be with artifact. Some cards say craft with island, craft with creature and stuff, but that's one of the reasons why map tokens are so good. The archetypes that have the map tokens in them, they also have other key role players that either allow you to tap artifacts, gain benefits for you already having an artifact, or you can just straight up craft with them. And in general, because the format is so fast, map tokens are also extremely beneficial, because if I play a 1-mana 1/1 flyer on turn 1, you don't really care about that. But when I put down Waterwind Scout, and now I have a 2/2, if my map token can make the 1/1 a 2/2, that's when flyers start becoming very irritating. Because, it requires more of an answer, because now I'm clocking this guy at a higher speed. Map tokens, I like map tokens. One of the issues I have with Explore in general, they tried to make Explore kind of like a theme, right? So like green-blue is supposed to be Explore. Now the gold card says when you explore with someone, if you reveal a creature, or if you reveal a non-land, then you also get to put a 1/1 counter on this gold card.
Okay.
But if you reveal a land, it lets you put the land on the battlefield after you reveal it. And okay, that's kind of cool. But there's also not that many good cards that explore, whereas there's a lot of good cards that create maps. And so it's like, really, this theme of explore is doing what these other cards that create maps do on their own. Like, there's not really a lot of payoffs for exploring, except what you get out of the explore. Now, that's a good mechanic in general, but the fact that they made that into a coherent theme is just dumb. Like, it made no sense, because it's like, okay, my theme is revolved around me exploring, and that's mostly green. There are some cards that are blue that explore, but for the most part, it's green. But it's like, okay, well, one of blue's main themes is creating a map token. And creating a map token is just better in so many ways than exploring, because you have the optionality to choose who you put the map token on. And as well, you don't have to use it for that purpose. I always like to say that from a competitive standpoint, more options create more opportunities to win the game. And so that's kind of why I liked the role tokens in Wilds of Eldraine, because it just added a high level of complexity. And on the other side of the coin, it really was not intended for new players. Like, I think that would just be a terrible set to introduce a casual player because of the role tokens, because there's so many, and that is just super complicated. And that's where it kind of differs who these mechanics were intended for. I think that why you and me enjoyed Wilds of Eldraine so much is because there are a lot of benefits to a person who is like a tournament spike, and maybe you're not even necessarily trying to win events, but you just want to be able to track your progression and increase your skill level over time. And whenever you do something that you put a lot of time into, for these kind of people, it's enjoyable to get rewarded for that aspect. Whereas, like, the mechanics in this set, they don't require as much background knowledge, as much time to play with, right? And it's just like a map token is just broke. I mean, it's just good because there's so many things that work with that map token, and it's like rectangle theory. My card generated 2 rectangles, and I fly, and your guy doesn't. I mean, what are you going to say about that?
Yeah, no, I actually didn't think about that until you brought it up. But it's like, yeah, that's why I enjoyed Eldraine. Just I could see myself improve, even if I, would actually play and then, arena hand shuffler fucks you over. How it be, what it do. But just being able to see like my decks, the quality of them and the consistency, just how it everything intertwines together. Yeah, like that's probably why. That is why. Not even probably. It is 100% why I kept with Eldraine. Whereas like Ixalan, I'm just not really interested whatsoever.
That's what I was trying to get into in the beginning when I was asking you what really hooked you on Eldraine, and that's why I know the sets I've had the most enjoyment with are the ones that actively incentivize you or reward you for playing these 3-color decks. Maybe it doesn't have to be every time. There can still be opportunities to play 2-color. But the fact that that's kind of like, it's very, very rare for you to have a successful, if we're at like a competitive tournament, it's going to be very, very rare in Lost Caverns of Ixalan for it to be the correct decision for your seat to play a 3-color deck. Whereas in Wilds of Eldraine, that was the correct decision for you to at least splash a couple of cards in a 3rd color a decent amount of the time, right? And when I talk about more options give you more opportunities to win the game, when you're playing a deck that's all just 2-color pairs incentivized versus a 3-color pair, what happens is there's going to be times when you sit down at the tournament in a 3-color set, and if you put in the time, you're going to understand how to go about this strategy or take this certain pathway that may take a decent amount of reps to get into, but you're going to be more rewarded. There's a higher ceiling on what you can accomplish through deck building. Whereas, I mean, there's obviously going to be skill involved in building the deck in whatever set, but in general, a 2-color pair set, sometimes one of the issues I have in this set is it's really difficult to pivot. Wilds of Eldraine was super easy to pivot. You could just take the best card, and then because the fixing was so rampant, not seeing this color, I'm cutting this color, because a lot of my cards work very well together. And it's like, in this set, a lot of the times, I just keep getting pushed into blue-white. And sure, that's like apparently like the highest win rate color, but at the same time, I keep not having the results that I want. Like, in my opinion, has really changed about this set since the beginning. I don't mean to ramble on, but really to get into the nitty gritty, at the beginning of Lost Caverns, I really enjoyed the set, and one of the big enjoyments I had was that from an outside standpoint, when we compare this set to other sets, a lot of the cards in your deck are just lower stat sticks than every other set. Like, the stat lines in Wilds of Eldraine on the average card are just way better. The average card quality is so much higher, and I think you could say that this set is on the very low end of the spectrum for the commons. So a lot of people had a difficult time assessing, if I have 5 bad cards in this selection, which one is the best to put in my deck. I feel like I was very good at analyzing which one was the best before people started watching guides, and that gave me advantage because I was essentially able to soft force blue-red pirates for so many drafts. Like I told you, I started off with 2,000 gems, and I went up to over 12,000 gems. Like, at one point, I had like 11 drafts, and I had 10 trophies and won 2 wins. And that was all within the first week because I understood which of these filler cards have the most synergy with what I'm trying to do. And what's happened recently as we enter week 3 is people have watched these videos and now there are less options in the pack. So that's why I keep getting forced to play blue-white, because the optionality isn't there that it would be in a 3-color set.
Yeah, and I feel like that's always going to be true with most sets. The first week's fun if it's like, a proper draft set. But I think it's telling where if you have 8 skilled drafters in Eldraine, the draft experience is going to be fun. Like, if you have 8 skilled drafters with Lost Caverns of Ixalan, it's pretty much just like, all right, pick this, pick this, pick this. Like, the choice is just not there.
Yeah, and I can kind of tell you, like, one of the reasons that I keep losing now, like, I mean, the last 2 videos I recorded, I went 0-3 and 1-2, and to me, that's really crazy because I had a high-value deck both times. It's because I was trying to play the seat that was the most open, and so I ended up with a good deck, but because the other people, they just started off with a bomb, and it's very difficult for me to pivot. Either I didn't get offered those bombs they had, or there's just no fixing, and I already have like 5 high-quality uncommons in the color pair I'm in. I don't have access to those bombs. And then so I go against these people. I have a good coherent deck. Well, the bombs in this set are cards that you can play on turn 1, 2, 3. And so sometimes that bomb can just steal the game before you have the opportunity to even do anything. I mean, in Wilds of Eldraine, it's not really like that. Because when you're offered these high power level cards, because things mesh together very well, you can kind of just do what you want, right? And so you're talking about these 8 competitive people at an Ixalan table. What's going to happen is everyone is just going to be playing what color pair they start out with. And a lot of the times, what I've found, my mindset has transitioned going into this week. I've kind of picked up on a couple things that other people have said, which is that you almost have to draft with a preference. You almost have to soft force in some ways, because you need to just build the deck that is going to have the most bombs. Like, in some ways, it's like if you start off with a bomb rare, it's very, very important in this set to play the powerful card that you started off with as pick number 1. In Wilds of Eldraine, because there were a lot of opportunities to pivot and get paid off for it, it didn't matter if you took Gruff Triplets and you didn't end up playing it. Obviously you would like to, but there was sufficient reason for you to just leave that color and not just play with a bad green pool and just have this one card that wins the game. Well, in Lost Caverns of Ixalan, I don't think there are a lot of incentives to pivot. And so we're talking about at that competitive table, one of the big, like, skill gaps, I think, in like pro level drafting is understanding signals that people are sending. And so it's like, well, if everyone is just trying to play what they started out with, the signals aren't changing very much. So now that's kind of taking away a level of skill for the competitive player, right?
Yeah, and I would say a great example of this that I could bring to is like I remember I had the running in like for blue-black fairies. Like I like first pick grapple kind of deal, but then I just noticed like, okay, 5th pick, there's a Torso Tower. Like I low-key have to take this. Like, okay, and now I'm seeing like cards like cut in, premium removal spells like that, and just like ballroom guess. I'm like, oh, okay, like there's no red drafters here. I'm gonna just pivot to red. It's like, okay, now I just have a red-white aggro deck like at the end of it. And from what you said, obviously I haven't drafted the set that much. I think like I played like 1 or 2 drafts.
So why do you think that is, that you're able to have that opportunity to pivot like that off of the most powerful cards you start off with?
Yeah, I think it is because the set is like a higher power level. Like there are so many cards. Like when you open a pack, all the cards are almost all the cards are playable, bar a couple exceptions, right? Whereas when you open an Ixalan pack, that's just not the case. Like especially because like you were talking about earlier with that Explorer and how like the explore mechanic, like, yeah, sure, it might be a constructed thing, but I feel like there's too many of these like constructed archetype cards mixed in with the draft, and not enough like actual synergy in the common areas to take advantage of it. Because like I remember in the first Ixalan, you had like Jade Light Ranger and that Overgrowth Elemental that gets a 1/1 gain 3 when you explore, but you need 4 rares for that to work. So like you just couldn't, it was really.
Yeah, the explore mechanic.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what I was getting at is I think something people don't think about, the reason why you're able to start with the candy grapple and then go in so many different directions, whereas if I start off with Breaches and Lost Cavern, I'm trying to play this specific deck or I'm going to be penalized, is because the most powerful cards in Wilds of Eldraine were the removal. Now, having a, premium 2-mana removal in Candy Grapple, where if you see this for the first couple picks, you're just going to keep taking them, that can take you in so many different directions, versus if the most powerful card in this pack is dependent on a synergy, well, either way, I want to play to the strengths of the powerful cards I've taken, but this one forces me down a narrow path. Like Breaches, he specifically gives you incentives for using Pirates. Pirates aren't even available in all colors. Whereas Candy Grapple, that's just a busted card.
Yeah.
I can put that in any deck. And so that's where kind of that opportunity cost is being removed, because the reason why a lot of these commons in Ixalan feel more fillery than Wilds of Eldraine did isn't just because it's just a low value card, but because it is a card that's dependent on synergy, whereas we talk about cards like that in, Wilds of Eldraine.
They can be played alone. Like, you can play the synergy cards alone or with the synergy.
Well, and they also have a synergy, even if it's not a big synergy, with everything. There's a difference between hatching plans where it's like, okay, I just need to have some form of sacrifice fodder, and that is available in every single color in the game, versus with Breaches, Pirates are only available in red and blue, and more so in red. So then it's like, I don't even have the opportunity cost to play off of this like benefit. And at the same time, it's like, okay, there are a lot of cards like that. I think Breaches is kind of one of the lesser end examples, because it's just a good card on its own, but the ceiling is just so high if you have the Pirates, where it's like, I would just like to play Pirates. And also, in general, the colors themselves, like red, I found it very difficult to play a non-aggressive red game. Whereas in Wilds of Eldraine, I feel like red, if you want to play a more control style game, that's obviously going to have to be supported by a secondary color. But then if you're trying to play a late game, you can start taking Grabby Giants as your top end versus, what was the Unleash the Hounds guy? The red guy? The 4-mana dog.
Edgewall Pack.
Edgewall Pack. Well, it's like, yeah, that's the 4-drop of choice if you were in aggro. There's also just another pathway for this other, like, lane. And I so far in Lost Caverns, I've found that is only an option if you're playing blue-white specifically.
Yeah.
Because blue-white, you can either play this game where, to be fair, this option isn't even always available to you. The first option is that I'm going to play a all flyers deck with all 1-drops flyers. And the reason I say that isn't always available is because some of these cards are uncommon and those get picked very quickly. So you might just be forced to play blue-white control. Whereas, like, Grabby Giant would table a large portion of the time. Edgewall Pack would also table. There are a lot of times where you got to choose between both of those cards, and you got to make that decision for yourself. That is somewhat true in the blue-white archetype in Ixalan, but at the same time, in the Jeskai colors in general, you have to play an artifact game. All of the good cards either are just a strong artifact, so I'm going to put it in my deck anyway, and at that point, I want to have artifact synergies because it's an additional benefit, or they require artifacts to be the highest ceiling they can reach. And then you talk about black. The reason why black is the lowest win percentage color is because you have to play a slow game. There's no way to play an aggro black deck. There's not a single aggro black common. And most of the black commons in general are just not very good. And in an aggro deck, you're going to need to have good commons, right? Because you want the sum of the deck's parts to be greater than the bombs in an aggro deck. Like, if I have an aggro deck, or no, let's say if I have a Breaches, that's just a really good card, and I would say it's a more aggressive style card. Or a Neem Pakal, which I played with in the video, where when you attack, you get a token attacking, and then this card gets a 1/1 counter. It's like, that's an aggressive card, but the reason I lost with that deck is because the sum of my parts was not greater than the bombs, because I was trying to play aggro. Like, if you want to play aggro, the way you overwhelm them is with a bunch of low mana drops. And even if you see this Breaches one time, if you don't have other 1-drops and you're going to play that on turn 3, that still sucks. I'm not reaching the highest ceiling of this, right? And so that's why I say, like, you're kind of forced to do what the designers intended with each of those color pairs, because that optionality is missing.
You're trapped in it, yeah.
Yeah, and that's something that, like, I enjoyed about Wilds Eldraine was the optionality and the complexity. And that's where the point of this is to talk about these products are made for two different people. I think that Ixalan is fun, but I think it's more appealing to a casual person where if you are not trying to be sweaty and maybe you just don't pay that much attention to the meta, you just came back into this set for the first time, it's going to be really fun because you don't have to put in much legwork to find success. Obviously, there are exceptions to the rule, but for the most part, if you want to play an aggro deck, you just take all the 1-drops you can find. And if you're a returning player, that doesn't require much thought. Now, we can compare that to Wilds of Eldraine with the 6 different tokens you have to have.
Yeah, I would say a takeaway from Eldraine, was like, why did this happen? Why can you do this in Eldraine? It's because the mechanics that it introduced, rolls and everything else, every single color, the theme was there with every single color. Yeah, like you could do roll stuff, and that's why you're able to, and then the bargain too. Which enabled you to have that consistency, whereas when you're, pigeonholed in Ixalan with like these 2 colors, this very specific mechanic that only those colors had, that's why Eldraine is just a lot more enjoyable, since every single color is doing the same, the same mechanic, but they're doing it differently in their own game plan, so you can mix and match.
Now, I kind of want to talk a little bit about the fun deck. So in Lost Caverns, the fun deck is supposed to be like the Caves deck, right? And I want to make this distinction for anyone who hasn't played it. If anyone played the Gates deck in Return to Ravnica, that was a playable draft deck. And that could actually, like, if you assembled all the pieces, you could win with that strategy. That is not the same with Lost Caverns. The Caves deck, for the most part, it's not even a Caves deck. It's a Caves engine. And this is on the high end of you having the most success with this spectrum. If people actually know more about like this as an option to play, it's probably not even going to be available for you like 9 out of 10 times. Because what is actually usable from the Caves deck is there's supposed to be, all of the lands at common. They say you can pay 5 mana, sacrifice this, and discover 4. Okay, well, in the Caves deck, the issue with that is you want to be putting caves in the graveyard, right? And it's like, what? All of my payoffs cost a lot of mana, so I don't even necessarily want to take a turn off to put 1 cave in the graveyard, and then everything I reveal off Discover goes on the bottom, because that's a turn where I need to be playing my my payoff. But then also, the payoffs just don't reward you that much. Like, the best payoff is Cynthia's Benthesor, which is a blue mana 6 mana blue card, 4/4, and it says, on play, for every cave that you control or in the graveyard, look at cards at the top of your deck, then you can draw 2. So you need to have minimum 2 caves. And in most decks, if you're playing an aggro deck, you probably don't want a cave, because you don't want to tap land if you have a lot of 1-drops. And if in this format, if you're not super aggressive, you're not even aggro. You need to have all 1-drops to really like be aggro for sure, or else you're just mid-range. And at that point, if you're like a late game deck, you want like 2 caves maximum. So the way that I've seen caves are even remotely playable is there's one cave that says you can tap a cave you control and pay 1 life, and that gives you any mana of any color. So that's good because the payoffs are in all of the colors. But you're not really playing that to play an all-out caves deck. The times you're including that card in your deck are because that card tables, it's easy to pick up, and if you can have a couple of those, that's the only way that you can play a multicolor 3 to 5 color deck, is because this card lets you add mana of any color when you've already got these caves. And most of the caves like that discovered, they also table. So if you're the one person who's able to pick up these, then you can use these to enable a bomb from another color. And I will say that is most beneficial when you're playing black, because black is the color that cares most about Descend. If you don't know what Descend is, it pays you off for every permanent card in your graveyard, or if a permanent card is sent there this turn. So in black, if you're able to use these caves to tap for different colors of mana, and you're also being paid off a little bit by sacrificing the value cave to discover, because that's a permanent in the graveyard. In other decks, you just don't want to do that. If you're playing aggro, that's not even an option for you, because you don't want tap lands. And you don't, if you're playing a multicolor deck, there's no way that you're playing aggro. Like, that's just not even like a thing. Like, you're gonna lose. And so the caves deck is more of just an engine where you have this 1 mana fixer card that lets you do this neat thing in niche scenarios. And so that kind of sucked because caves didn't pan out. Like, I was excited to have like a deck like that. I think that's really fun because what that would do if it was successful is it would make the format where, even though I'm a player who likes 3-color decks, and that's one of the things I find the most enjoyment with, that's why I enjoyed green, there's still one option for me to go about in that 2-color set. But because that's not really a thing, I don't get to experience what I enjoy most about the set. You're kind of cutting out that kind of like customer group who enjoys drafting for this specific reason. And that's why I feel like both of us enjoy Wilds of Eldraine, because that's the first time I've ever been able to make a 5-color deck.
Yeah, and I feel like that's just the pitfall of Ixalan overall, is that they just don't have legs. Like, so many of the cards don't have legs by itself. When something requires you to pick up specific pieces, it's just, you know, it's always gonna fall through when you don't hit that critical mass. Where you don't need to hit the critical mass in Eldraine, they can just be supplemental. And it still just works out.
But what was the fun deck in Eldraine? So like in this set, we had the caves. That was kind of like the gimmick deck. What was like the fun thing, like,
I feel like there's so much. I mean, I wouldn't even say like it's not gimmicky. Like, I can't really think of like a gimmicky deck besides like
was the blue-white tap deck supposed to be like the gimmicky deck?
I think that is that's the gimmicky deck, I would say, and that was just, you know, the only really archetype that fell through. Whereas like rats, I mean, that's not really a gimmick. That's just you know, full
that's
archetype.
True. I mean, maybe the fairies deck, because that's like the tribal deck. That's kind of what I'm getting into, is like caves. That's kind of a tribal deck, right?
Yeah, precisely, yeah.
So it's like this set. You know what's funny is that Ixalan is centered around all of the tribal strategies. That's basically like, I mean, I never got to play with the Ixalan like draft first one itself, but from what I've seen from the cards, like I started off playing like an explore deck. While that set was in rotation. From what I understand about Ixalan, it's just supposed to be the set that's centered around tribes. And it's kind of funny because I feel like in Eldraine, some of the tribes were just better. You know, it's just kind of funny.
Yeah, you could like if you're trying to build a tribal deck and it doesn't work out, the cards that you picked up from the tribe are still playable. Like,
yeah, they're usable in other strategies. And that's kind of what you would like to see going forward, is like, I enjoy building tribal decks, but whenever you have a tribal card that says, I can't use it outside of this tribe, and the tribe is also only available in this one color, that's ass. Like, why are we doing this? You know, like, when you could play fairies, it's like, I could play a fairy deck, and if I see a bunch of fairies, I'm happy. If I see a card that says Talions, and I don't have a fairy deck, I'm happy.
Yeah.
If I see Baronati, I'm still pretty happy. It's still just a good card, you know? And that's kind of what you could say about what is kind of wrong with this set, on top of the fact that there are not a lot of incentives to gold cards. I think Captain Storm is just a broken card. It's a red and a blue for a 2/2. Every time you play an artifact, you can give a pirate a 1/1 counter, and because artifacts are such a heavy like synergy across more than one color, that is just a really, really strong card. But then I talked a little bit about the Simic one that's gimmicky and worked with Explore. That card is just ass. You can't even put that in any other deck than the Explore deck, and also a lot of the good Explore cards are not common. So that's not good. All of the ones that touch black for the most part are bad. I can't even name another standout one other than like the red-white one, which whenever you attack with it, you can discover. That's decent. But in general, what I found about these signposts is they don't pull you in the direction of what that color pair is. And that's something that you would actually really appreciate in a set that's supposed to be about tribes, that's supposed to be about forcing you down specific lanes, is I'm supposed to have a large incentive for going down this pathway. Whereas that honestly just is not the case. And in Wilds of Eldraine, most of the gold cards hit the mark. And when you draft Greta, I want to pick up Foos. When you draft Ash Party Crasher, I want to get a bunch of
the tokens.
Yeah, the tokens are things that make double objects. That's just what you want to do. Now, those cards are decent on their own, but there's also just a high ceiling with those. In Ixalan, there's some ceiling with these cards. I don't think it's high, and I don't think it's very reasonable to say that you can reach that ceiling most of the time that you draft that card. So to quickly end off this discussion, let's just go through the mechanics of both sets and briefly just talk about which ones we like and which ones we would like to see not return again.
Yeah, so I don't think rolls are coming back, but I think after you dig your teeth into the set, rolls are just like, it's so dynamic, it's so fun. The rule of only having one roll at a time, so like you want to like still like include those bargain cards, so you can bargain a roll away, put a roll back on. That I was a big fan of rolls and would like to see it return, but not likely.
Rolls, I will say, I enjoyed it. At the same time, that should have been the COVID mechanic when they were doing all that BS with the esports league where you could only play online. If you only played on Arena, rolls were amazing. But one of the caveats I wrote down for Wilds of Eldraine was that if you go to an in-person tournament, you need legitimately 10 different tokens. And it's like some of the tokens out of those 10 are also double-sided. So it's like I technically have like over 15 tokens, something ridiculous like that. And as a new person trying to learn in paper, thank God we have online. If you couldn't play online, rolls would be ass.
And yeah, that's what happened. Like when we went to person, I literally had to like, find the Exodia pieces of all the rolls tokens so we could both have like a set of rolls. Some of the tokens were double-sided and some of them were not. Every single token should have been double-sided. Like that was just kind of like required with just, the critical mass of tokens on there.
Yeah, and then, I mean, just to cap it off, there was also just an additional zone added to the game for adventure. Why do we need that?
Yeah.
Like there were just certain things like that where it's like, why? Especially when we're talking about every card not being double-sided, when this is an entirely new mechanic. At least with food, you might have a food token from a previous set or a treasure.
Yeah.
But with rolls, you couldn't. I think it was fun learning it, and I liked that other people didn't understand as much about it as me.
Yeah.
I just don't know if I would enjoy it as much if it came back, but it was okay.
I think the gameplay loop it provided was good, but I can definitely, I'm not going to miss it. What other, bargain? We already touched on bargain. Amazing mechanic. Of course, synergized amazingly with the rolls.
Bargain was just fun because a lot of these cards we had in the past, you can only sacrifice an artifact with a kicker effect or something like that. And it's that added optionality of being able to sacrifice a token or an artifact or an enchantment, I wish that keyword was put on more powerful constructed cards. There's certain cards like that 4-mana black card that lets you search your deck for any creature and put it on the battlefield 4 or less. What is that called?
Beseech the Mirror.
Yeah, I love that card. But because they didn't give us enough high power level constructed cards that work with that, there's just not a lot of fodder for those kind of effects, right? And it's that's just a mechanic I really enjoy. So that kind of missed the mark for me in that aspect. But in draft, it was just really fun because that also adds value to your weaker game pieces because even if you have a filler, sometimes you could just sacrifice it as a bargain object. So that was why bargain was so good. I remember in the first Eldraine, adventure was not nearly as fun. What made adventure more fun is the off-color adventures. That's just so enjoyable because in the first one, if you had Bone Crusher Giant, that was just broken. And you didn't have to do anything to extract immense value from that card. Same thing with Brazen Borrower. In this set, now you kind of have to work or do something to get value from both sides. And I think that allows them to increase the power level of adventures because now you have to do more work, right? Like, that was the best way to approach it.
And then, like, and a good example of that was Elusive Otter. As you could just be mono green and, like, okay, we're, putting the 1/1 counters on there, and then you might have this little body, early game body that if you happen to do, if you're not mad or sad that you can't cast the other half of Otter until way later in the game because you already got value from that first half. And then, but if your deck is built in a way to be able to, extract both sides, that's just when it's so nice.
Yep. And I would honestly like to see more adventure going forward. I would like to see that be a staple mechanic.
Evergreen.
I just enjoy that so much more than like two-sided cards like the Commit to Memory because it just, like I said, it just requires you to do more work. And it's a fair way to increase the ceiling. Because in Magic, it's like, you can never make anything more powerful than the power 9. That's just the rule. So you need to find ways to make things more powerful without exceeding the power creep that was originally intended. And creating off-color adventures is one way to do that, which is something I really like about adventure. And even they have an adventure card in Lost Cavern. It's actually really good. It's green for 1 green. You can make a map token for like X for something. That's just a good effect. And the other side gives you a creature, and that's just dope. Like, it adds more options to the game, and it just creates more synergies. Other than adventure, food. I like food.
Yeah.
I didn't think I really cared about food before this set. I was just like, screw food. The Gilded Goose was the only card I've ever seen be good with food besides Oko, which was broken for another reason. But other than that, I never really cared about food. This set made me feel like I cared about food. And I think part of that had to do with its fun level is determined by what the other mechanics are doing. So because...
like bargain of food.
Yeah, because bargain is in the set, food is enjoyable. But I feel like in Lord of the Rings, I didn't like that draft set much because food was just food. It was ass. It was like, why the fuck do I have this token?
Yeah, it didn't feel like it had a purpose where, like, I think that's why I love Eldraine. Every single mechanic, token, whatnot, has a purpose. It has a purpose. There's a reason it's there, and this is what you can do with it. Like,
and it had multiple purposes.
Yeah.
And that's why food was good. Other than food, I mean, treasure. Treasure, honestly, should be in every single Magic set from what I've experienced so far, because obviously they don't want to include these fixers like the Prof Prism and stuff like that in every single Magic set. But treasure is just one where you can slide a couple of those into every single set, and it just enables people to go outside of the box, which is really what I'm looking for in a draft, and treasure is just amazing.
And then with Ixalan mechanics, first, cycling, I'm really happy that cycling has become an evergreen mechanic.
And treasure is an Ixalan, by the way.
Yeah.
It's just not as rampant. That's one of the things. It's like, they could have fixed Ixalan with more treasure.
Yeah, and then with cycling, evergreen, like, that's just a good mechanic. We know cycling's amazing. The maps, I'm a big fan of the maps, just like with the flavor on it too. It just feels appropriate.
Maps are cool. What I will say about maps is I almost think I would like it better if we removed all of the cards in the draft set that said explore on their own, or we just changed them to have the effect to make a map. Because I just think there's like a power differential between making a map and exploring on its own. And I think that really shows when you go against someone else who is getting the maps and you're just exploring. You know, that's like one thing where it's like, I do like maps, but I also don't like when the other guy has maps and I'm just exploring.
Fair. And then what else? There's Descend. How does Descend play out in the draft? Like,
so one thing that I don't like about Descend, it's kind of counterintuitive to one of the other main mechanics, which is crafting. Because crafting, you want to banish stuff from the graveyard. Well, Descend, you want to put stuff into the graveyard. So that's already limiting you on what you can do with Descend into the non-artifact decks. Because if you have artifacts, you're going to want to be crafting. And it just so happens that the best colors are the ones that have to do with artifact. And so Descend, I honestly just now got the opportunity to play black. I think it's the most enjoyable experience in the draft. Maybe I just don't enjoy aggro after like doing it so much, but I think manipulating the graveyard with Descend is so amazing. Like, for example, that's why the cyclers are fun, because the cyclers, they put them on these mediocre bodies that you almost just don't want to put in your deck. I remember the last time there was cycling, like there's that one black guy, the troll. What is that guy?
From the Lord of the Rings?
Yeah, it's from the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, the swamp cycling.
Yeah, that card, you just use that in like Modern Black or, you know, Pioneer Black. Like, that's just a good body you want to put on the board. And so I'm sure in that draft set, that was good to play. Well, here, the cyclers, you really don't want to put them on the board if you don't have to, for the most part, because they're just not good stats. And so, because Descend is a thing, the cyclers become more high utility in those decks. So, like, the black creature, he's not that good. But because I'm playing black, and my main gimmick is Descend, well, I can cycle, and that triggers my Descend. So then that gives me the triggers on all the other guys, and so it makes cycling more fun. I like that. I wish that Descend was more widespread across all colors, or that crafting didn't just negatively affect it. Because that's what's stopping you from doing Descend. Because one of the best things they did with Descend is all of the cards that say mill is a choose. It's not you must.
Oh, okay, that's nice.
And that makes Descend so much better, because the obvious issue when your deck gets low, when you're playing a 40 card deck, you would normally be screwed because your good cards mill you and then you just deck out. But because you can choose, that made Descend more playable. I've been enjoying it the most so far out of any archetype. And the other thing that Descend does, there's this card called Another Chance. And I kind of wanted to touch on this before we end the pod. Black is just, honestly, my favorite deck to play. And what they screwed up with it is you need specific cards, similarly to green in Eldraine. So Another Chance is 2 and a black, and it says you can mill 2 cards, then add 2 creatures from the graveyard to your hand. So the reason that's really important to have when you play any black deck is because all your cards want to mill. But your issue is you don't have a solid win condition unless you have a rare. So typically a rare pulls you into black. And when you have a really good rare and you have multiple copies of Another Chance, you can just mindlessly mill your deck and go down to like 1 or 2 cards and you don't care. That's not a restriction, because Another Chance can always just get your bomb back. So it allows you to do what you want to do more consistently. But when you don't have that card, it really sucks. Because, like I said, there's a lack of win conditions. So now I'm reliant on drawing this bomb. So, or like a key uncommon. There's a guy called Chupacabra Echo, which uses Descend really well. He is a 4-mana 3/2, and ETB gives someone -X equal to the number of Descend in your graveyard. So that guy, you can use him, kill their biggest guy, and you have a body, and then when they kill it, sometimes you can just add that guy back to hand 4 or 5 times and just keep reusing it. That's so fun about black, and that's one of the most enjoyable things about the set, because coming from Yu-Gi-Oh, I really enjoy manipulating the graveyard, and that's why I am kind of sad that they don't incorporate more of like delve effects, even though I understand that's kind of broken in the game. That's the way I like to play card games. And so Descend was honestly the only thing I've seen in recent years where they found a way to work around that, because it can be really broken with cards like, there's a card called Defossilize. It says return a creature from the graveyard to the battlefield for 5, and then you explore it twice. And that's really dope, because my entire deck is Descending, and I have the black land cycler, which normally costs 6 mana. Well, if I use it as a cycler, now I can actually just play this Reanimator deck. This is the first time where you can successfully play a Reanimator deck in this draft. And it's actually a good deck. Because Land Cyclers just set you up for Reanimator. They set you up for Descend. And there's also another guy who is an artifact that's 2/5 flying. And he has Ward. And he also says you can target a card in the graveyard every turn and put it on the bottom of the deck. So other decks, they don't want to pick that up. But if you're playing Descend and you get that guy specifically, then you can play the deck. Because now I can just mill to 0, and there's no way for me to deck out. And no one else wants that. So you can play the deck. But when I didn't get another chance, and I didn't get that guy, I felt fucked. Because there's no way to win the game. You don't get to experience Descend that much, because it's really only valuable in black. Like, the payoffs are only in black. So overall, I would like to see Descend again, but I would like it to be incorporated in a better way.
Okay. Would you say that the War of the Spark block with like the Golgari, you had the Golgari stuff with the Undergrowth, and then you also had the Surveil and the blue-black, and you could like, since they're both black, you could like mix those together. Would you say that the Undergrowth, like since it had like multiple, there's those two different green, black, and blue-black doing those mill things, add that consistency to Undergrowth that is just missing in Ixalan?
What I will say is Ixalan did a way better job of doing that. What's bad about it is like most of Black's commons are the worst commons in the set. And so that stops you from really taking advantage of that. I would say that Ixalan did a much better job of trying to accomplish what that deck was doing in War of the Spark, because I really enjoyed War of the Spark, but I rarely got to play that deck. It was difficult to set up. In this set, it's easy to set up and in a convenient way. The issue is there's not many payoffs at lower rarity. And so that like stops you from being able to do that. Whereas like in War of the Spark, if I remember correctly, I feel like there was like a decent amount of payoffs, but it was just kind of difficult to set up the graveyard without like certain premium cards. So it's kind of the other way around.
Got you. Because I know a lot of the mill cards are like 4 mana and whatnot, like mill 3 kind of deal. So it was a little slower too.
I remember there was the Tarmogoyf guy. That was the gold card. That's what I remember from War of the Spark, because you had the Tarmogoyf guy, and that guy was kind of cool, but he required other things to do what you're doing. Whereas like the best cards in black, there's a 2-mana 1/1 Death Touch on play mill 2. That's just good.
Yeah, that's
nice.
Because
it's like I get to set up the Descend, but at the same time I also get value. And that's been the problem in the past, is like these cards that do set up the graveyard, they don't give value up front. I would like to see it incorporated in a different way, but I do think that keyword is a good way of classifying what's really just been in the game for a long time.
Yeah.
They just put too many words on the card, so I'm glad that's in the game. Other than that, we also have Discover, which Discover is the exact same thing as Cascade, except you also have the option to add the card.
Hand.
Yeah, add the card in hand. What do you think about that?
I played some of the Pioneer deck, the Discover deck, and that was just, pretty degenerate. But besides that, I think it's just better. It obviously is fixed Cascade. Adding that consistency to hand is just amazing, especially like it lets you play like those counter spells and whatnot too, or in like interaction pieces, and you just don't feel horrible like, oh, I just had an interaction piece and there's nothing I can do with it. Like, you just waste your Cascade. Or this, at least you get the card advantage. So I think it's, a very well-refined mechanic.
It did answer that issue, but I think why a lot of people who play Modern and stuff have a problem with these cards coming back. People don't have a problem with the mechanic. They have a problem with the liberalism to put it on cards that don't need to have that keyword, right? You think about like Quintorius. I don't know if that's the Explorer. I don't know if that's the Pioneer deck that you're referring to, but there are two Yeah, there are two Pioneer decks. One that uses the guy who's new Bloodbraid Elf, and one that uses Quintorius. Well, it's like Quintorius having Discover, I don't have a problem with. It's the fact that he enables an infinite combo. Because he says every time you play something from exile, you get to drain the other guy 2 life. And so that just makes it where you can set your deck up with all these copy agents. And like
Glasspool, Mimic, etc.
Yeah, and some of them come in as not legendary. You can set up a chain to where if you play Quintorius, that automatically wins you the game. Because the only targets in your deck are already manipulated. That's removing the randomness And that wouldn't be an issue if the Discover wasn't on this guy who burns and drains. You know, it's like, that kind of ruins the mechanic a little bit because it's supposed to be about randomism. In terms of being in draft, I will say it's very irritating to play against. And I think a lot of people would agree, the cards that you want Discover on are the cards that already give you value. And so when the guy discovers, you're just sitting there watching him get already more broken shit when he already got value from that card. And you can't do anything about it. You just have to watch this guy high roll.
Yeah.
I think it has a lot to do with putting the keyword on the right cards. And I think that can be even more said in draft, where Quintorius is even more fucking impressive. There's a reason they're only putting one Planeswalker in his set, because an infinite value engine in any draft set is broken.
Yeah.
Like last set in Eldraine, Ashiok, from what I understand, that's a terrible constructed card. It's just ass. But because it's a Planeswalker that protects itself.
Mix 2 bodies, and like, right?
Yeah,
Is it 2 or
yeah,
1?
mix 2 bodies.
Okay.
That's just broken. You don't have to have anything else. So we have that in Quintorius. If he didn't have the Discover ability, that'd still be broken. Because that's what's unfair about it. But then we add Discover, and it's like, okay, he got the body to protect itself. Now he can Discover, and he doesn't go to 0 loyalty. That's so disgusting that he gets to do that. And then in terms of like the other big Discover cards, you've got Geological Appraiser, which is Bloodbraid Elf. And you're typically, you know, that's a red card. So red's gonna have the most like 2 drops and 3 drops, because in this set, contrary to Eldraine, your 2-drop slot is extremely clogged over 3. So if you get a 3-2 for 4, and then you get a 2-2, that's just above rate, distributed across 2 bodies, assuming nothing else. That's just irritating.
Yeah, and the differential of just like, you know, if you Discover 4, hitting a 4-drop versus like a 2-drop.
Facts. And then we've got a Tali's Favor, which is a big one right now, one that people overlooked in the beginning, now one of the highest win rate commons. It's 3 mana for an enchantment, give someone +1/+1 in trample, and then Discover 3. And the reason that's unfair is because with all of our Discover cards, it gives a Discover of less mana. This one, if you have 3 Atali's Favors, there's been times where I want a Atali Favor on this creature, Discover, put an Atali's Favor on this creature, then I just got a 2 or a 3 drop, and it's like, what the heck? Why did you just get to do that?
Yeah.
It promotes the guy from mindlessly picking the Discover cards. I've also had the Geological Appraiser Discover into an Atali's Favor, and then Discover into something else. It's like, why do you get to chain those cards back to back?
Yeah, you shouldn't be able to Discover into a Discover, for sure, and there's too much value for free.
You know what? We just discovered the biggest fix to the mechanic. There should just be a new errata that says anytime you use a Discover or a Cascade, you can't hit another Cascade effect. Because, like, wait, why are you allowed to do that?
That would fix it, yeah.
These cards, people aren't using them for that reason. In a draft, they're using them to hit other insane mana cheats. It's supposed to give you a small mana cheat, is what it seems like, and it adds a little randomness and a fun. But in draft, in a competitive sense, that's really irritating. In constructed, when people are manipulating their deck and getting like leyline binding and shit, that's even more disgusting. They have these rulings where the adventure or the double-faced cards, you can just choose the higher costed thing. That's a whole nother problem in itself.
They did change that. I don't know with specifically the Venture. I feel like they did.
With Adventure, it's still a thing.
Oh, okay. You still can cheat. Like you do the what's that guy? The guy that's the Adventure 7 mana.
The Manador guy. You can still cheat with that guy.
Okay, they didn't change that? Damn.
No, it's only double-sided cards.
Only double-sided.
Like commit to memory, things like that. You can't do that.
I want them to change it to where like commit to memory. If you Discover 4, you should be able to cast commit and just not in memory. Like it's really not intuitive. Discover highlighting the ruling inconsistencies.
So honestly, I don't think they can do it right, so I don't want to see that one come back. I don't think it's fun because it's just a win more thing. You're never going to pick something that has Discover on it unless it's a good card. And in that case, it's just hella bonus without doing any other work. We talk about how Bargain was all upside. Well, you still did technically have a cost.
Yeah.
But there is no cost, and it's genuinely all upside. which is really, really irritating.
Yeah, that kind of variance is just not Hearthstone kind of variance is not it doesn't feel the best in Magic.
One other mechanic that kind of fell flat, it's kind of just the deck altogether, is the green dinosaur deck. The issue is like they're trying to compound with the explorer and stuff, and I know I already touched on this. What is irritating about green, all of the good cards, even if you have a good deck, it's not fun because the good cards are just stat sticks. Like there's a green card that's a 3-mana dinosaur for a 6/6. If you attack with this guy and you don't control a dinosaur, he gets a stun counter. Unlike the Pumpkin King guy who you had to sacrifice a token every turn, you're only ever going to pick this card if you have all dinosaurs, because green is pretty much all dinosaurs. Like, it's difficult not to have dinosaurs, so you just have a 3-mana 6/6. That's one of the ways that I lost in the video, is because the other guy just got too many stat sticks and it wasn't fun. He didn't do anything crazy. He just got these free bodies. There's another guy that's 3 mana for a 5/3 with Ward 2 at the beginning of your main phase. Add 2 green mana. That guy is just insanely broken.
Holy.
All the good dinos cost a lot of mana. So now suddenly on turn 4, you're just putting out a 6-mana card. And there's a 6-mana 7/7 at common. That guy also just has Ward. It's like, what the fuck is happening here, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like dinosaurs, they need to stop attributing certain things with these tribes that aren't actually a mechanic. It is not a mechanic for dinosaurs to just give you more stats than what your guy is. Like, there's going to be good cards and bad cards with that, but even when you make a good deck, it's not fun to play vanilla beatdown. And the other side, it's even more not fun, because you just know it's like, I guess the only way I can beat this guy is if I have premium removal, but he's always going to have a better late game than me, so like, I know that it's the inevitable, but there's nothing specific I can do to stop him. He's going to cheat out fat guys, and that makes dinos less fun, which dinos are supposed to be a fun thing, you know? It's like they make all these people like Gishath and like...
They're just linear. Like they're just linear. That's the problem.
Yeah, that was the biggest problem with that. The artifact synergy, I think that's like the last big mechanic. I enjoyed it a lot. It works very... Oh, and crafting.
Crafting, yeah. Crafting's sick.
Crafting is amazing. I enjoy crafting so much. Favorite card right now, Inverted Iceberg. 1 in a blue, mill 1, draw 1. Has synergies with Descend because you're milling. And you can craft for 6 with an artifact to transform into a 6/6 on attack, untap, or tap any creature, including himself.
Yeah.
So you get value up front, you get value later. That's why crafting is so broken, and that's why we've seen the Jeskai aggro decks really just take over the meta. You can get early game board presence. Then late game, if you ran out of gas, you actually just didn't run out of gas, because you can just craft, and that's really broken. So crafting was dope. The only issue I had with it was that it conflicted with other mechanics like Descent and like what you were trying to do with caves. That's like the only thing, but I like doing stuff in the graveyard, so being able to banish from the graveyard, I like that. Overall, the artifact synergies were fun. It added a layer of synergy to the map tokens, because there were some cards like Adaptive Gem Guard, tap 2 untapped creatures or artifacts. That was amazing. You could play like Waterwind Scout, the 2/2 that gives a map, and then you just tap both of those on play. And now you created 2 objects, you get the value. So overall, I like the artifact synergies. I just didn't like that artifacts kind of gatekept other mechanics. I don't know how you balance that, but I would like to see that approach come again in the future to artifacts.
Fair.
All right, well, that's all we've got today for the official Wilds of Eldraine Lost Caverns Kumbaya. If you got this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to drop down below what your favorite mechanic was from each of these sets, or which one that you did not like. As always, if it's not the goo, it's got to go. Peace.
Ooh, is that indigo?